Hello there, and welcome to Camo Net Supremacy, a YouTube channel that focuses on Arma Reforger and the competitive community for the game, less on the game itself, more on the competitive community. I am your host, Bambi Sandy, and this will serve as the first in a long series of interviews for the competitive community. If you represent a team in the competitive community, or you believe that you'd be a good candidate for an interview, you can join our Discord through the link in the description and reach out that way. We're also looking for people that are comfortable with being anonymous sources for their teams, communities, organizations, to support proper journalism for the scene. The aim there is to speak to events after the fact, to drive depth, accountability, interest for the scene. Less about so-and-so hurt my feelings and more about, hey, our team was an absolute shit show during season 2, even though we won. If you're a fan of our content and want to subscribe, that's great. We aren't looking to appeal to a mass audience, and we expect to annoy some people down the line, so we don't really expect to grow the audience past a certain size anyways, let alone making any money. Our content doesn't feature any crazy overlays or editing on purpose, so aside from technical issues and bits on the front and back end of the recordings, kind of leave everything in the middle for transparency. With before I forget, no crazy relationships with any teams or tournament hosts. These guys are here just because I asked, basically. They don't owe me anything. So, if you guys don't mind, can you give a general explanation of who you are and how you ended up doing competitive for Reforger?
Sure. I'll go ahead and start, and Hyper can chime in whenever he wants. But him and I kind of came from the same place. But so how this all started was, we were a part of a small chill sim, sort of say. We always hopped around different community servers and played in them, and we tried Misfits community, started a Misfits competition league, kind of. It didn't really kick off all that much. I know plenty of other big groups have tried to do it in the past as well. So we kind of wanted to separate everything and then just start one big one. Um, with no affiliation to other big discords. I feel like that can be thrown off in some people's eyes. But so we started this back. We really started diving into it last October. And creating the Discord and all that, and then we really started sending out information and to specific groups, seeing if they would be interested in competing in season 1. And it really just took off from there. I think we ended up launching the Discord in November of last year, and here we are today with, I think, over 1,400 members.
Nice. And then as far as like how you guys literally got here, because just to kind of make it not approachable, what's the right word? People can kind of see themselves in you guys. How did you end up even like with Reforger?
So me personally, I came from a long history of Call of Duty. I played that since I was a kid, since Modern Warfare 1 came out. And I would say kind of, the Warzone scene started dying a little bit. And I just was looking for a new game, and I never played Arma 3. So I built my own first PC, got into DayZ, and then went right into Arma, and I kind of fell in love with it from there. So I'd say the last probably close to 3 years, I've been pretty invested in Arma Reforger.
Nice. And then Hyper?
Yeah, well, from a kid, I've played Arma 2, DayZ, and a bunch of different shooting games, but I grew up being on a lot of like Halo clans, so as soon as I played Reforger and Milsims reached out to me, I was like, this shit's dope. And from there, I sort of just have not really played many other games since.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. There's something. I obviously started with Squad and not Reforger, but it's similar enough, even with the maps that are on offer in Reforger, that it's effectively sort of the same gameplay and things to account for and stuff. There's something addictive about the breadth of the game in a different way than I'd argue like CS:GO or Call of Duty. Um, just because you always have to kind of account for like obviously the balance for the game is a little wonky right now, but you always have to account for like a helicopter flying over and spotting you, or an armor piece in an area that keeps you from kind of doing what you want to do. It's almost a rogue like of an experience, in the sense that we've all been playing on Everon and Arland for the past 2 years or however long the game's been out, basically. Not a positive, but uh, the experience is different, even in just minute ways. If I go to defend Shotan for the 15th time, technically, I don't really feel like I'm bored there. There are definitely aspects of the game that need some work that do make me bored, but the actual like way that you engage with the mode and what it kind of wants you to do is kind of an interesting and an appealing thing. I know, at least for squad, um, that still, I mean, there's tons of people that are still doing it. Um, you're literally playing on the same 8 or 9 primary maps, Cora, Talil Outskirts, with like no map updates. They'll change the literal look of the map when you pull it up, but like the terrain and stuff is all the same. You can spend thousands of hours and not even be top tier in the game. There's just that much to kind of do. Whereas like I wouldn't see myself doing that if I was just playing Modern Warfare 2. Like if I had to play, God, I can't even remember the map names for Modern Warfare 2. Egg on my face. If I had to play on the same map, for a year, I'd lose my fucking mind and I'd burn out way long ago. Um, were you mentioned earlier, Silky, that you used to play with like Misfits. Have you guys been associated with any particular groups before, or was this kind of a linear? You noticed that there was something kind of missing in the space, and you decided to make the thing.
Early on, we were kind of partnered. When Dark Grew was big, we were with them, and then we left Dark Grew and then joined Misfits because then they were starting the comp league. But we were never fully associated with one specific group. I would say the only one that we were really associated with was just our small chill sim Discord, which was Blacklight Invictus. We were kind of just a core, 15, 20 guys that always played together and, would hop around from different servers from there.
Gaia. And then speaking of servers, do you guys, for ordinary play, you guys play on anywhere specific?
I jump around a lot. I'll hop into Rubber Band Rangers, Triple Threat Tactical. I'll hop in a lot of other things. I've been getting into the Ultimate Hardcore servers. Those are pretty fun.
Oh yeah, but
So
a lot of the Eastern Front. They also
WCS
do
has them.
Ultraman.
Spearhead's got them.
Nice. And then Hyper.
For me, it's been a lot of the Eastern Front. I love the ultra hardcore at the minute. Sort of got really burnt out with just normal conflict games. So those servers are quite enjoyable when you're in for something that's a bit rough.
Nice. And then from here, we'll jump into the direct questions about competitive and ARCL and stuff. What would you guys say drives or limits the balancing for stuff like the weapons, what maps are played on, and then some of the more kind of overarching rules?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to look for is fair gameplay. Obviously, there's some really cool custom weapons that some really good modders have created and made. They tend to be maybe a little more overpowered, over the base RHS or WCS weapons. That kind of throws a wrench into some things because then you have two teams of 20v20 that are using the same gun all season. We'd like to see some variety. Unfortunately, season one it started off with the SR25 and ended with the RSAS. That 98% of the people were using through the season, and we kind of want to get away from that. Um, and keep it core, keep it fair for everybody. Obviously, any small updates that could happen could make one gun more powerful than the next. You run into some suppressed weapons uh, that you can't even hear, that you're standing right next to the person on. So, those things are tough to weed out. Um, I think we do a pretty good job in catching those things, but sometimes they slip through the cracks. As far as the maps and stuff go, um, we like to keep our mod size down because obviously we have console players that are a part of the ARCL. So it's not fair to have a max 20 gigabyte server that they have to download mods for because they just don't have the space, right? And plus performance, performance is a big thing. We don't want people crashing. We don't want people having low frames. So the less mods that we have in the server, it's better optimized for everybody.
And then I'll kind of dovetail back into what's already been said, but what about sort of rules specifically? We talked offline in a little private ticket about some of like how season one performed, and sort of some of the mid-season kind of rule changes. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, it's extremely, if anyone's ever created rules, there's a base set of rules that are pretty much always there. But then when you get into competitive, you kind of have to tighten down on certain things. Like, we have, I think, 9 pages of reshader policy that's out there. We ultimately didn't, let games go into night. So, night vision and, graphics card settings and stuff really didn't come into play that much. The hardest part is having a rule for absolutely any sort of exploit that could be there, because people are always finding new exploits in the game itself. So it is very hard to come up with a list of every single exploit out there. We kind of have the blatant statement of, is it going to offer you a competitive advantage over somebody? And that's the biggest thing. So, we try to let people, use their own judgment, and that's really the biggest thing is ask yourself, am I doing something that could be potentially against the rules, or is it giving me an advantage over somebody else on what I'm doing? Um, and I guess depending on the severity of that really depends on the consequence.
Right. So with stuff like, God, I guess it kind of dovetails into the next section, talking about maps, I suppose. So I'll kind of avoid that for now. But when you're balancing between weapons, rules, and sort of your expectations, obviously before, like ahead of season two, I'm sure that you guys already have like, you'd already said that Everon is going to be for the 20v20s, and then Arland is going to be for the 10v10s. I'm sure that you guys already have like layout positions of where the objectives are going to be that are fought over, and from that you can kind of project onto what the fighting is going to kind of look like. Is it going to be interesting for casting and stuff like that? Is there anything in particular that kind of drives balancing in that regard? Do you want to walk kind of a fine line between something that'll look interesting and bring more people to the scene, but also is reasonable for participants? And I would just offer the small explanation to kind of give that a little bit of context. The season one map of Gogland, I didn't actually think that there was anything wrong with that, but the distances between the objectives made it so that way action was kind of like sparse and in between. You would do like one big push on like the center point, and then if you kind of lost that, you would have to spend 10 minutes kind of resetting for another push. And then the literal distance between, what your defense objective was and what you were trying to attack meant that you couldn't really like leapfrog or springboard using your defense objective versus something that, for instance, like most of squad maps, like Cora is always my go-to in my mind, where like if you make a push on an objective, that's cool. You just immediately reset and do another flank or a push because running from one objective to the next is only like a minute and a half. Is there anything that kind of do you lean towards one versus the other as far as like what kind of looks good or like shorter kind of action versus kind of what plays well?
Yeah. So we kind of look at flow the map. Goglin worked very well in the 20v20s. I think there was enough people. The 10v10s, it was very slow. That's kind of why we wanted to go to a smaller map. That's why we chose Ireland, because it is smaller. Everything is within a running distance. It is, advanced and secure layout, so you can't backcap people like you can in a regular conflict. Um, and we test these things when we do preseason matches, and that kind of gives the GMs and us an idea on exactly how the map flows. I think in the middle towards the end of season one, people started, not everyone would just go to that center map. People would start using flanking routes, setting up roadblocks, setting up mines, using all the tools that they have in the arsenal to make things interesting. I think that got better and better as the season went on. And I think season two will be pretty good with kind of what we got cooking.
Nice. And then something that's more of kind of a self note or something that maybe other people can kind of vibe with if they come from squad as well. Something that's interesting to kind of step into is the concept of, you know, the base game for like Everon or Arland, if you're using the ordinary points and you're not having like a maps guy go in and custom make like, no, it's not going to be Chotain, it's going to be like to the east of Chotain. And then, fighting over coastal base Morton isn't going to be where the ordinary conflict. Yeah, so like going into the base scenario and kind of tweaking it for your needs. There's
Yes.
a potential issue there where like, okay, well now from a team perspective, my timings and like how I work around that area is a little bit different because the tournament is using technically like a custom map or a custom layout. Whereas in squad, you didn't have that issue where like you knew that in 2 weeks we were going to play on Cora AAS V2, and then we could play organic matches of that in the lead up to it, and then it's just one for one what we trained with is what's kind of there. Like the capture mechanics, that's not that I'm saying that you guys mess with like the time that it takes to capture a base or like the scaling for people or anything, but like all of that was kind of one for one along with the gunplay. So you could always be kind of in the zone and train with what the match was actually going to be. You know, is there a
Yeah.
concern, or sorry, I shouldn't say is there a concern? Is there an interest in the future with like say in between season 2 and season 3? Hey, these are the these are the maps that we're going to use. Not only are these the maps, these are like the layouts that we're going to use for season 3. It's going to be the same thing, so that way people can kind of like work on timings and like, okay, I know exactly where I'm going to be at because it's the same thing, or it's been announced as the same thing as last time.
Yeah, so in a perfect world, hopefully down the road we can get somebody that is very good at making maps. Right now, we're limited on who touches the mods, so it's Hyper, myself, and then Supply are really the only people that touch the mods or the maps. So we do use the base game maps, but we do set up custom points. We don't use a vanilla setup of points. If we did that, Evron north to south would just be way too long and too many points. So, we're down to like 5 to 7 points. I think season one had 9 in total. So, we shorten that up and we'll probably obviously shorten the distances up. And I think, Hyper, you can confirm, but you were making a couple scenarios on Evron, whether it is north and south or possibly east and west.
Yeah, I'll probably make a few different versions to see what we like the most, see what flows better.
Yeah, and then through testing it through the preseason, and anyone watching as far as a game master, we can kind of judge on flow and make sure everything does go. The hardest part is when you're doing the maps like that and generating these custom points, is distance apart, right? You want equal distance for both teams to the first objective, second objective, third objective, so on and so forth, right? You don't want to have one team that's closer to everything than the other.
For sure. Yeah, and two, just kind of a side question in the future. I suppose that it's kind of a moot question because ideally you would have like custom maps that, so you don't have to play on Everon or Arland. You can play on something that's just dedicated to 20v20s and 10v10 sizes instead of 50v50s and 60v60s, because that's really kind of what Everon is tuned for. So like ideally in the future you could have probably a selection of maps that are kind of squad sized that play well regardless of player count. But I think of some of my most in the ordinary game, some of my most fun engagements weren't actually on real objectives at all. There's kind of like, if you can picture in your mind the interstitial space or like the woods between Chotain and Levy on Everon, it's just a patch of woods. There's like in really specific parts of the map, they just never seem to be the parts that you're organically playing on, which sucks. You almost wonder if like maybe one guy on the map team for Reforger was allowed to like give a fuck, and that's, you never get to see that guy's stuff for like his area or region.
Yeah.
But like there are patches of trees where it's not just fucking, oh yeah, there's no bushes or cover or anything, and you can just laser beam someone from like 500 meters away because it's just
Hmm.
open area basically with tree top cover. There's like gullies and ditches and logs and stuff like that. Would you guys have an interest in the future in like if you're using Everon or Arland to go in beforehand and add in like sandbags and logs and different trees and stuff to kind of make, you say you've got like a big open area, you can kind of go in manually beforehand and save it as a custom scenario to like make the
Yep.
gunfights
Yeah,
closer and
and
stuff.
we're kind of doing that now too. There's a cool trench mod that adds trenches, so you can be kind of hidden when you're going through those open fields and take different paths. I think Hyper's explored some of that. We've talked about adding some additional buildings in areas where it's not normally at on Evron. The biggest thing for that is performance. We don't want it to ruin performance in any way. Going like you mentioned a little bit ago with custom maps. I would love to get to that point. Um, we're just not there yet.
No, for sure. Um, so with maps, I kind of mentioned it before, but what kind of goes into picking the layout for a map? Like, hey, for 20v20s, it's going to be Everon. We've decided that the tournament's going to take place like up the East Coast or up through the center or up through the middle. Do you kind of take a holistic look at like what the terrain is that people are going to be fighting over? Obviously, you guys had said distance before, but
Mhm. Yeah, so when we start creating points and start, judging distances and making sure everything's, the same distance away from it, we also go into the actual game and one person will start on let's say CSAT, one person will start on US, and then we'll have the same vehicle and we'll drive to either the first point and we'll time it. Does it realistically take the same amount of time in different routes, cut through fields? We don't want one team to be able to get to a point in 27 seconds, but the other team it takes them a minute and 30 seconds no matter what route they go. So those things we do test. Obviously terrain is a big thing, uphill, downhill. Evron, you get towards the center of the map, it's an uphill battle all the way to Monty.
yeah, it's probably one of my I I don't know if they did anything with the game on purpose, but yeah, Squad does the same thing when they come out with a new map. They just go into the fucking Geosat website and look for a cool looking island or a patch of land, and then they import the height map data and fucking recreate it. So you end up with an issue on Everon in most places where you're like, ah, yes, this objective's in another bowl or downhill. Nice. So I don't actually have like coastal base Morton. I get that it's a coastal base, but imagine if that western hill just wasn't there. And then you
Right.
actually had an incentive to push into the base instead of just fucking sniping into it. Like, God, every base is like, I implore people, every base is on to go in and look for themselves. Every base is either in a bowl, whether that's shallow or sharp, or it's on the side of a hill. You're like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, there's no bases that are in like wood lines. They're all just it bothers the hell out of me.
Yeah, I think our idea for season 2 was to get a lot more urban combat involved versus woodland combat. Um, so we are wanting to focus on points in inside towns.
Are you guys concerned then, kind of an impromptu question, the base kind of lighting system for the game is an absolute war crime where you'll
Yeah.
be looking at the outside of a house and there'll be maybe a window in particular and there'll be a guy in that window staring back at you, but because he's like classed as indoors, everything is just pitch black. There's like no light illuminating that guy at fucking all. Are you guys planning on trying to account for that in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, that's one thing I've had on my mind to make sure we look at when we get into our preseason testing.
For
If it
sure.
becomes too much of an issue, we're gonna have to make obviously adjustments on points.
Gaia. And you could all I mean, like, you could always just collapse a couple of fucking buildings. Like Montanak is such a big town that like you could just level every fucking 3-story building and then you don't kind of have that issue. Like if it's I suppose philosophically speaking, if you're only looking at like one window, you could just pre-fire the window and then you're like, all right, well at least no one's in there. Or you just throw a GL into it or something like that, which might legitimize some other roles.
Right. And it does suck, and I obviously we've all played the game and have had it happen of getting shot through a dark window, but especially when you're moving in with a team, to have one person actually give cover that is watching the windows, because if you got a LPVO optic or something like that, you can zoom in and see inside the windows. It's just when you're running across the street and looking up, you can't see.
Yeah, I use the I need to stop making squad references, I'm sure, because probably only 20% of the people that are going to watch this have played that game. But I think of like the Fallujah map, and that was sort of like all the way dials turned. Um, Obviously, that was kind of like a key concept for that map, but it just ended up being a shitty key concept where like you'll pie wedge a corner, you're like going to get ready to cross a road, or you just made your way into a building and you look out of a window and there's 35 different windows that are facing you or that can look at you at that moment. So like that's why I kind of made the reference of like, if there's kind of an issue with like, okay, well, Montanak has 4 3-story buildings, you can just level them, and then when you go to cross the street or come up on a corner, the only building that's kind of facing you is like a doorway and a window, so that wouldn't be so bad. In again, kind of talking about like overall balancing, do you guys kind of look at when you're selecting mods for like armor and weapons and damage and ammo types and stuff? Are you guys kind of actively thinking about time to kill compared to the vanilla game at the very least? Like, if the I always make the joke for the vanilla game that the saw is the most overpowered weapon, period, because it has 0 recoil. You don't have to aim down sights, and if you throw tracers in the thing, you can laser beam something at like 500 meters. Are you guys kind of interested in playing with that a little bit in the future?
So, I mean, you get into the current, WCS and RHS plate carriers that have, the front, back, and side plates. Um, I think it's a good thing to have, and people utilize it, and some people take it out for weight. We don't necessarily look into TTK all that much, unless there's an overpowered weapon that okay, why is this gun one tapping, but normally it takes 3. I don't think we've ran into a situation where we had issues with one carrier being stronger than the rest as far as plates go. The biggest thing we've had is just overpowered weapons.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, coming from squad, there's no real body armor in the game. You either, I think the math. This is all my information is pre ICO before I left the game.
Hmm.
But like limb shots, regardless of whether it was arms, legs, feet, hands, were like 5 rounds to kill. And then body shots were always a crisp 3 for the torso and like the groin, and then headshots were singular. So like
Right.
there is a piece of me personally that will dislike that sort of like, oh well, the weapon that you're holding in your arms technically stops bullets, and the body armor behind it stops bullets. So you actually hit that guy with 15 rounds, but only 4 of them really killed him. And you're like, so there will always be a personal part of me that's like, God, that's fucking horse shit. But I kind of get it. If
Yeah.
anything, the body armor doesn't kill people, so like, yeah, just everyone kind of knows that it's there, and if the expectation's set up beforehand, just use that as a tool to get better at hitting headshots. Or like if you know that someone's got a big rig on, just aim for the legs. Like, kind of have to get over myself in that point, and I would suspect that a couple of
Well,
other people would too.
yeah, that, and anyone that's played Arma Reforger knows, latency and desync. You can shoot people sometimes 10, 15 times and it doesn't do anything. Hit reg can be spotty at times.
Yeah, and I think that also, funny you mentioned that, kind of spikes the feeling out process of like, time to kill, for instance. Like, what should the
Yeah.
fire rate for most of the weapons be? Well, the saw is more overpowered as like a starter gun in vanilla than the M4 because the fire rate is much larger and you can make more mistakes with it while holding down the trigger because it's got more ammo.
Mhm.
So, but like that's only really the case because of hit registration time and in latency. So I almost wonder if that kind of gap between those two weapons, and then also some of like the modded weapons wouldn't be so big if that wasn't such kind of an issue.
Right. Well, they came out with all, AP rounds for, every gun variant now. So, it kind of negates armor, but then you still run into that hit reg issue.
Yeah, for sure. Um, just kind of again because it's kind of micro conversations without diving super deep into one particular aspect so far. Would you guys be in favor of changes to increase the viability of armor play? I noticed when I was going back and watching through some of the season 1 recordings, both before the rebalance happened and then after, that armor kind of borrowed some of its vanilla game. Um, God, what's the right phrase? Viability. Where like because everyone can have an RPG on their back and there's no specific rules, kind of like there is with Squad. There's almost no point in playing armor because there's a 99% chance that the one guy that's in the tree line near you has an RPG. So like you spent 15 minutes driving across the map. Would you guys be in favor of doing changes to make that more playable?
So when it comes to armor, we've really limited on what, I mean, you're talking about vehicles, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So we've limited what vehicles can be used. Right now it's pretty much transport vehicles and um you get a Humvee with a 50 cal on it. We have transport and supply helicopters, but we don't have any attack choppers, no rocket pod helicopters, there's no LEVs, there's no tanks. We wanted this to be more of a ground focused competition, especially when you get into the M1 Abrams, for instance. I couldn't tell you how many times I've hit one with 7 or 8 rockets and it's just still going. And that can really hurt a team on a point, especially if not everyone is AT, right? I think if we get into larger matches in the future, we get into the 50v50s or 60v60s, we can certainly maybe start entertaining armor, but it would be limited to X per match. You get what I'm saying? So, we don't want just anybody at Sergeant to be able to take out an M1 Abrams and, have 6 tanks sitting at a point.
yeah, for sure. I totally follow you. In Squad, sort of the standard match size was sort of 36v36, and even then, for most of the maps, because most of the maps you would play on had armor, it had like a 30 mil BTR versus a striker, and each team would get one or two. Most of the time, you didn't even have the people to really spare for that.
Right.
Squad kind of found ways to organically, even outside of competitive, to really kind of balance that in interesting ways, though, which still will forever. If I sound like I'm salty grapes about a breakup. Still a little bit, because God, that just a lot of the balancing decisions. Maybe it was made by an original employee or something like that, and then they got fired or stopped listening to that guy. But a lot of that stuff kind of only worked because it was balanced well. Because
Right.
on a team there were only maybe 4 people that had rockets, and only one of them was super effective. When you did hit the armor piece, typically lit on fire and started burning up the people inside, or it would completely disable it and it would just fucking sit there. And you don't really have a lot of that in Reforger, so I'm not going to be too upset about that answer.
I would love to see a full scale 64v64, helicopters, tanks, and everything. But I could just see it being difficult, and it can get out of hand and I don't want to make difficult decisions on the game masters or other admins either. When if someone complains, I want to limit that. I just want a smooth flowing game, as best as possible.
No, for sure, I agree. I'll inject it here because I don't think that it's later. Yeah, I'm a big ground game component person too. But that's mainly just because I think the rocket helicopters specifically in the game are so overpowered.
Yep.
The amount of kind of rockets that each one gets, even the Huey. Obviously, the Mi-8 is absolutely fucking ridiculous, but yeah, there's no skill or information that's really required beforehand against like ordinary objectives or infantry or even armor. You just go through and carpet bomb an entire objective and just
Yep.
comb through the tree line, and you got
I'd
everyone.
I'd have to place AA guns every 150 yards.
When
To make
even
it fair.
even then though, like the incentive structure for someone to sit on that AA gun for the rest of the fucking game, like what are we
Right.
really doing?
Especially when you get into a 10v10, everyone wants to be a part of the action, right? I know some people might have specific goals as far as, what's supply transport or just transport in general. When you get down to, okay, you got 3 guys running supplies and it's a 10v10, that means you only got 7 people to the front lines.
See, that's what I really enjoy structurally speaking about 10v10s kind of being normalized, because I can go through if I have an organization or a team of like 30 something people, and I've got helicopter pilots and I've got people that play armor and stuff, and I can go through and do, hey, we'll sign up for, the 20v20 bracket or whatever, uh, you know, this quarter, or however you guys want to pace out when the tournaments happen. And then we can sign up for the 10v10s next month where it's just the infantry guys getting to shine. I think that there's something really appealing about that, and hopefully other people kind of recognize that.
Yeah. So as of today, we only allow each team to be part of one division or one bracket.
Right, within the
Right.
tournament, yeah.
Right. We don't want, a big powerhouse team that, a Discord that has 6,000 members, be lightweight and middleweight. And then, if we had heavyweight, be all three. And then, they just have the same power. If they're a powerhouse, and they win in all 3 brackets, we kept the 10v10 for, the smaller milsim discords to really have a chance to get out there and have fun.
No, right, yeah. And I was just saying, like, outside of a tournament, say, like, season 2, I have my
Right.
guys go through in the 20v20, and then season 3, we do the 10v10.
Yeah, you could certainly do that.
And then I didn't actually have it as a question, but this is a spicy opportunity to include it. We'd had initially when I came into the Discord and was asking a bunch of questions and feeling stuff out. I was asking about like whether you guys were going to allow coalitions and stuff, and the response that I'd gotten was kind of like, well, it's not really an issue right now, and we don't really want to. If it's the difference between maybe someone's got a group that's only got 5 people, and then there's another group that's only got 7 people, so they can't even like individually participate in the 10v10s. But like if they merge as a coalition, they get to play in that. So I'd kind of felt out that like because it wasn't sort of like a meta issue, you guys didn't want to keep people, that would preclude smaller groups that maybe wanted to play.
Right.
What is, since you just kind of spoke on like not wanting kind of a meta team with a bunch of members to you dominate everything just because they've got, 3 entries, an A team, a B team, and a C team into the 20v20s. Um, you how would you kind of feel if that kind of aesthetic was recreated through a coalition, right? If you got, not small groups, if you had, say the 2 top teams in the 10v10 tournaments, just like super fucking really good players at the game, decided to coalition together to make a 20v20 team, and then they just won for 5 years in a row. Would that
Hmm.
be kind of an issue in your guys' eyes? Something to account for?
No, the only reason I say that, so here's where the issue resides, and this is where a lot of teams fall apart because we've had teams do this. We have a current team that's doing it, and we've had other teams that have tried it. The problem that you get into there is you have 2 different team names, and then when it gets down to ultimately me telling them is you need to pick one team name that we can use. So I have to create then roles for that team. Because every team has specific roles. They have their own chat channel, they have their own voice channel, and then they have obviously the roles that are assigned to their name. So when it gets to picking a team name, that's kind of when an internal debate starts happening between the 2 teams because one might want their name over the other, or their name first versus second, and vice versa. I don't have a problem with 2 smaller teams combining to join into a heavier weight class, or even if they were smaller. Okay, I only got 5 good guys, and you got 7 good guys. Let's get into the 10v10s. As long as you guys can collectively come up with a one team name, I'll let you play. I don't care.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'd already kind of said my piece because that's, if anyone's listening this from the squad competitive community, it's like a fucking plague over there. Yeah, because it, to a degree, there's going to be like 20% of the people that are participating in a tournament that just wanted something to do this Saturday, and then maybe 30% of the people want to win, but they're like, we'll win on our own terms, and then the rest of the people are kind of like, yeah, I just want to win. I don't give a fuck about anything else. And they'll like kind of take shortcuts and do whatever the fuck. And when those people kind of exist on a large scale, that kind of don't give a fuck and they just want their name on a board or on a Discord thing, um, it does lessen the drive that kind of smaller teams have because they're like, why wouldn't we just do scrimmages, or like why would we care, or God, what's the right phrase? Why would we put in more effort than we already do in just a Saturday scrimmage if we know for a fact that we're not going to win because these fucking all-star guys are over here. But maybe that won't actually port over from squad, and maybe I'm completely wrong. I saw going through initially that you guys have a rule against radio backpacks. In squad,
Yes.
map play is really kind of reliant on that. Why the rule against them?
So when that rule was initially created, that was before the supply backpacks or radio backpacks had a spawn limit. I think now they do. Now they have, 25 respawns or something. Um, it got hairy when we had, let's say, in a 10v10 situation, and one team just spent, let's say, 45 minutes attacking the contesting middle objective that's going to win you the game, right? And then the opposite team sets a radio backpack 100 meters away or whatever, and then the whole team's spawning on that. We felt that it wasn't fair to the other team, especially in 10v10. The constant pressure, it just didn't feel that it would be a good competitive environment to do it. And the same with the command truck.
No, that's fair. It's interesting because I'd be curious at some point. Surely someone could make a mod. It kind of only works in squad, or worked in squad, because you never really had to know exactly where the radio backpack was, and most of the time, in Reforger, you spawned like in an area around the backpack, so you could spawn like behind some bushes from a guy that's standing right on the radio backpack, which I'm not a fan of. In squad, they would spawn right on it, so a lot of times, even if you didn't see exactly where it was because it was like next to a rock or a bush or something like that, you'd see the big fucking group of people spawning in, and you just dump them all, and then you'd walk up to the backpack. But like a considerable piece of why that works out in squad, I was thinking about, is that you don't have to ever actually interact with the backpack. You get within a radius and it immediately just destroys it.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
I almost wonder if they could put something like that into Reforger where you don't have to walk up, because then that's an opportunity for the interaction to be buggy, and maybe you're on high ping and it won't let you like get the disabling option. And then two, like that removes any I almost said cheating, which it is, but it removes any sort of like metagame of like putting it halfway into a boulder or into a container or something like that.
Right, and I've seen them, go halfway into a stove and you can't interact with it. Right.
Yeah.
So,
I would suspect that it would be far more balanced and legitimate as a strategy, um, if you kind of just had to sweep the area. I for instance, like with Gogland as an example, just because I spent 7 hours staring at that fucking middle objective through recordings. Those rock cliffs. I can just have my guys, hands across America, across that region really quickly, and then we're like, all right, good to go. Um, Whereas you're not literally looking for the radio backpack. So it'd be interesting to see if that could kind of come as, because that to a degree kind of, especially if you have fewer people, that does add a little bit of depth and strategy as far as like, okay, well, I'm gonna we're the if we've got 10 people, 3 people are set on defense, one person's doing logistics, and the rest of the people are going to do offense. Well, the people that are doing offense, we need to be able to sustain like a specific angle of attack or something like that. Well, we don't want our radio backpack to get immediately destroyed, that we got to reset completely. So we're actually going to make it kind of like far back, past the reasonable expectation that it'll get destroyed by like someone walking by. It adds a little bit of depth, and it kind of, because a lot of it's funny. One of the things that are kind of imported through AAS is, for better or worse, just kind of like straight lining it. You might do little variations of like, all right, we'll flank around a little bit to the left or like a little bit to the right. Like if we're attacking the middle objective and we get wiped and we have to reset on our defensive objective, we're just going to drive or walk straight from the defensive objective all the way in. Whereas if you have kind of radio backpacks or an alternative spawn, not that I'm disagreeing with the stance offered, but it gives an opportunity for like, okay, well, now we can actually vary where we're coming in from, and we can rotate that from time to time, which adds depth to my squad lead job, where like, hey,
right.
we tried to attack from the northeast and it didn't fucking work out. They were kind of waiting for us, so we're actually going to rotate, take 10 minutes, which is kind of an annoying period of time, but it'll be worth it to wrap around to the southwest side 200 meters away, drop the new radio backpack, and then we'll try it again from here.
Yeah, and I kind of think it's worth to add this. So, each team has what we call team reps. So each team has, 2 to 5 team reps that have a specific role, and then have access to a specific rep chat. So any big changes that we make, all gets polled in the rep chat. So the reps and the teams actually vote on what we implement and what we don't implement. So it's not just us as directors and staff that are, just creating this list of rules. We are actively getting feedback from the teams to see what they want. Because we want, obviously we want as much input from the teams as possible. One, that makes our lives easier. And two, that's the fairest way to do it, right?
Oh yeah, that's not bad. The cynic in me would say not that that's bad, but the cynic in me would say that there's potential there. Yeah, every competitive team that I ever played on as a Joe, there was a huge disparity between what the actual Joes wanted to do and what the fucking two guys that elected themselves as the leaders wanted to do, especially with time. People jade out at different rates and burn out at different rates and kind of go their own
Right.
ways. It'd be interesting to see because you had said that each team has like their own text channel or their own category. It'd be interesting to see those polls not just held at sort of like a team rep level, but at sort of like a team channel level. Because then you could, not that you should necessarily deviate from it, but it'd be interesting from a data perspective. I'm a fucking nerd to see like, okay, well, Team Nautilus, which for some reason is always my fictitious name for a team, Team Nautilus has 36 guys and they're always enrolled in the 20v20s. Well, 32 of those guys said no to this thing, and the leadership said yes. Um, I suppose that doesn't really that's not necessarily your role to even collect that data from a tournament hoster's position, let alone like a culture
So
perspective. But
I've thought about that, and early on I kind of made a rule that we run everything through the team reps. So those are the leaders of your team. There was times where we would go into their text channels. Let's say Rubber Band Rangers, for instance, they've got 88 members in here. If I went into their team channel and I asked the question, I'd get 88 different responses. And it made it extremely difficult. So we kind of force it on the team reps. They're the communication from us to their guys. And we kind of structured it that way, and that's kind of how we like to do things. Yeah, I get you could run into the situation where it's their opinion, but we do also see a lot of times they'll screenshot the poll and they'll put it in their team channel, and a lot of these guys have their own private Discord channels for their teams, and they're probably sending it in there.
yeah, and two, even if there is like a big disparity with a community or a team, it's not necessarily your guys' job to police or to kind of communicate like, hey, look at your fucking guys. They said yes, but you guys said no. And
Yeah,
I
so I think
suppose that if anything, that's up to sort of third parties because again, you guys are just the tournament hosts.
so. One
To
good one,
go
one
like,
good
hey,
example, and we also look at, okay, what's the poll percentage? Okay, was it 52% of you said yes, and then the rest said no? Or was it 50-50? Or was it 86% said yes? So what happens is, like, on the last one that we did for suppressors was a big one for season 2. I think the first poll we put out was, should suppressors be rank locked? To sergeant only, or whatever it was. And it was a very tight vote. But then the next vote came out, do you want suppressors in general? Yes or no? And then ultimately, suppressors in general got turned off. So, no one wanted suppressors.
right.
So it's an interesting, we look at, obviously, each vote, and then we can compromise. And a lot of team reps come in with additional ideas that we might not have thought of. And then, we sit down, we're like, oh, that's a good idea. We'll put it up there. We'll ask.
For sure. That's actually a really great example to give. Um, how do no, that's not the right way to ask that. How does competitive culture in other games like Squad or Hell Let Loose or whatever contribute to kind of what you're doing here? Like obviously AAS was imported over from Squad, but is there kind of anything else that's ever at the top of your guys' minds to add in?
Not so much on my end that I've watched. I can't speak on Hyper's behalf, or
No,
supply or whatnot. But
I haven't watched much other competitive stuff. At most, it'd be like things like fucking CS:GO and shit. But we don't want to look at other things and be like, yeah, we need that for our own server. It's just sort of we'll come up with our terms and roll with it.
yeah, I guess there's a good base set of rules that come out of all competitive gaming, no matter what the game is, right? That we've kind of adapted and then modified towards specifically Reforger, right?
Right. I meant less sort of like rules and maps and
Right.
stuff or
Talking
modes
more play
and
style.
no, more like squad has a ticket system, right? So like yeah, the match times can go for 2 or 3 hours. Actually, I think it's limited to like an hour now in the competitive scene, but because you have to flip to the other side to play that through, because not all maps like regions are the same, so it's only fair, if the Soviets beat the U.S. team on this map to 3 of the middle objectives, you give the other team the opportunity to do that same thing. Kind of like how
Yeah.
Left 4 Dead. Didn't think that I was going to shoehorn that in here, but like you get an opportunity to play as the survivors, and then you get an opportunity to play as the infected because it's sort of like 2 different experiences. You get your stab at doing it. So I was more
So
speaking specifically to like the ticket system, right?
early on, we almost launched season one just like that, where it was a point system. Um, the issue that happened was the amount of staff that it would take to track all of that information. There's no good auto database that'll collect that information. Because we were going to give points based on how long they've had an objective captured, how many kills players got. Everything was going to be worth a certain point, and then at the end of the season, those points would then be added up, and then okay, what team had the most points? Um, it became difficult, so that's kind of when we implemented the rule of how about this? We have X amount of objectives, 7 objectives, let's say. The only way you can win is if you control obviously the middle objective or the majority of the objectives by the end of the 2 hours, or you capture all the objectives leading up to the enemy base. And if you do capture that last objective, then a 15 or 30-minute timer starts, which gives the other team obviously that amount of time to get that last objective back to then continue the match. But it is a hard stop at 2 hours for us. And on top of that is, we do these matches on Saturdays and Sundays. We have a lot of EU based teams. We've got a lot of US based teams. We've got Indonesia teams. We've got, all over the world teams, and time zones become an issue. Um, how late in the evening it is for EU when it's afternoon for US, and it becomes a big time constraint for people. And we want to try to keep it as fair and limited as possible. We don't want to sit here on a Saturday at 6 hours waiting for a game to finish, right? Especially the broadcasters, Task Force Gaming and so on and so forth. 2 hours seems to be like a really good window, and I think it flowed really good for season one.
Yeah. If there was a mod or a database or some way to responsibly and logically track like a ticket system, I'm just going to keep making references to Squad, but like, a logistics truck is worth, 10 tickets, and then an armor piece or a helicopter is worth 20, and then each individual life is worth 1 or 2 or whatever the fuck. Taking an objective gives you 30 additional tickets to work with. Losing an objective doesn't lose you tickets, but whatever. Would you guys have any interest in kind of taking a look at it and potentially implementing it if it all kind of like panned out and made sense?
I think if it was structured and detailed enough, we could certainly take a look at it and see if we can implement it. That it'll ultimately come down to tracking that live during the game. Because we might only have 2, 3 game masters that are watching the game, right? And I like to have one game master for each team, and then a third game master just doing an overall high level both teams, and then helping where help's needed. It's not like I wish I had 25 game masters that could, step in and watch these matches, but it's just not realistic, and unfortunately, we're not there.
No, for sure. I feel you. That'll forever, regardless of what game it is, from a team perspective, from a tournament hoster's perspective, from a staff perspective, getting people to sign up was
Yeah,
the
and
the crux of everything.
yeah, and a big thing, especially with Bohemia's rules and stuff, everyone's doing this for free on their own time. No one's getting paid for this. If anything, a lot of us are just are dishing out our own personal money for servers and stuff like that. So
Yeah, for sure. For what it's worth, not that I think it has any value in this. There's once upon a time before I burned out on Squad where you can actually, to some degree, I don't know how fucking real it is, and I guess technically, the word of someone in another country doesn't really fucking mean anything. But yeah, there is an appetite from like a company perspective in like, hey, yeah, I just reached out to like 3 or 4 different server hosting companies at the time, and I was like, hey, I don't want anything in any way, shape, or form. If you want to give me like a referral code or something, so that way you can track like what business I'm driving to you, cool, whatever. It'd be really cool if we could have a sponsor for this team or this tournament or whatever. All I literally need is just the ability to put like your logo on like the precast screen, like brought to you by Intel. Not that I reached out to Intel, but like, kind of an esports style, like this tournament brought to you by X, Y, and Z server hosting company. And I actually got some pretty weirdly reasonable responses from that. So,
and we have done that in the past,
okay.
and kind of still do today. As far as the server hosting goes, we have used ARCL as your code and get 10% off or whatever, and it kind of gives a little kickback to us to help with server provider, but
Right. Do you guys, this is a spiked question from me, do you guys see or envision any role restrictions to enforce diversity across teams and the tournament in general? That way, there aren't 20 light machine gunners with sniper rifles on their backs walking around per team.
So currently, as it's set up, you can have one primary and one secondary. Your secondaries are limited to either shotguns or rockets. I think there's a pistol slot, so we don't allow people to use an M4 and an M700. You know,
Okay. Because that's one of the first things that I keyed in on with the season one. You'd see someone with a sniper rifle and then a fucking AR on their back, and you're like, what the fuck are we doing? The AR's got an
Yeah,
LPVO.
I think early on it was implemented and then ultimately taken away. I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as it is today for season 2, you cannot have 2 primary weapons. You can get into maybe a submachine gun, an MP7 or something as a secondary with your sniper rifle, but you can't use a sniper rifle and an AR.
Right, and I would assume in those situations, your MP7 isn't gonna have the damage values that an ordinary AR
Correct.
would then have. Yeah, that's kind of the
Correct.
everyone. That's the Bushmaster stereotype in all the Arma titles. Is everyone wants to use the Bushmaster or the Rattler because it has the same damage as a fucking Cyrus, like an 8.3.
Yep.
Fucking ridiculous. That's good to hear, though. I actually wasn't really expecting that. And where I was kind of coming from that again, coming from Squad, from a culture perspective, it's really healthy where you say, both from a balancing perspective in the match and then just a general culture piece where, there can only be 2 lats per squad if you really want him. But in a 36v36, you're kind of not filling out complete squads most of the time. You can only have 2 hats and 1 like bolt action sniper rifle guy per team. So from a culture perspective, if you're one of those guys, it gives you an opportunity to like reach out to people on other teams that fill those roles, and you could talk about like, well, how do you handle that, and well, what are you really good at, and there's kind of something to follow there as well from like a journalism or a caster perspective, where like tactical gaming can go in and say, oh my god, this is the match of the century, both teams have like some of the greatest snipers and AT guys, and then you can kind of latch onto that. Whereas with if everyone's an anti-tank guy because everyone's rocking an RPG, you're kind of like, yeah, you hit the shot that you were just next to. Whereas, like, if there's only one or two guys for that role, even on the objective, you're like, oh shit, well, there's an armor piece just rolled up on the other side. Now the onus is kind of on me to, like, flex my skill. I got to wrap around real quick before he kills everyone and hit him in the ass or whatever. So I was mainly kind of asking from that perspective, but
Yeah, so we don't limit, what loadouts they can run per squad. We let them choose their own fate. If they want, 19 snipers and one guy with an AR, we're gonna let them do it. We're kind of letting the teams decide and coordinate how they want their guys to play. And we've seen a lot of teams in season one that have had great coordination and separation across, different types of loadouts. I mean, we've had light machine gun guys acting as CQB guys. Just going into a building with an LMG and turning corners and lighting people up. But we don't limit them on their squad and what they can and can't run as far as the loadout goes. If it's in the arsenal, you can use it.
I suspect that I know what the answer is going to be for this, but if season 2 comes along and every single team, every single person is just using light machine guns with like an LPVO on them, would you be willing to change sort of your stance on that?
I think if we got into the position where everyone was using one specific weapon, we would certainly look into it, and try to make changes. If let's say the PKM had a stupid damage output, zero recoil, we would probably remove it from the arsenal and force them to use something else.
Okay, that's reasonable. I'll take that. Um, that was a side question that's not relevant. You'd already kind of spoken to why there were two tournament sizes or two bracket sizes, 10v10s and 20v20s, and you actually ended up kind of speaking to like the 10v10s were kind of meant for smaller groups, and then the 20v20s for sort of the larger people player wise that could put together 20 and 20. And then you'd also kind of stole my thunder a little bit, not on purpose, by touching on like inevitably you guys might upsize if there is tons of interest and people have the numbers to put up for it to do larger sizes like 40s and 50s and 60s.
Yep.
Do you
So
do you expect or do you kind of want to maintain the cultural difference between the sizes though?
so right now, we actually have technically a bracket larger than 20v20. There's a lot of teams in the 20v20 bracket that we allowed to elect into what we call the 20v20 plus bracket. So they're fairly large servers, and it's actually probably 80% of the people playing in the 20v20 bracket that have elected to play in the 20v20 plus. So that can be 30v30 or 40v40. So it'll ultimately be decided before the match if they're matched up with two 20v20 plus teams. What size do you want to play? Now, obviously, if a 20v20 plus team gets matched up with just a strict 20v20 team, they have to play 20v20. I'm not going to force just the standard 20v20 team to find more people to play. That's not fair. But we do have a lot of 20v20 plus teams that are going to be participating in season 2. Hopefully by season 3, I mean, our list is growing at a rapid rate as far as teams go. So I expect that we're going to have a heavyweight division next season. The reason we didn't do it this season was because we didn't have enough teams for both brackets to make it, let's say, even. There might have been only 3 20v20 plus teams that could have been, okay, they want 40v40s. Well, that makes the season pretty short for them. So that's kind of why we elected to stick with the 2 weight classes for season 2, is so that way everyone had a chance to play the entire season versus one specific weight class would only play for 3 weeks and then they would be out until season 3.
That makes a ton of sense. I get you. I guess what I was kind of trying to speak to specifically with that is, at the time, anyways, when I kind of wrote that question down, the 10v10 is really fantastic for kind of the little guy that's new to the scene, that's probably trying to like build up numbers and get some recognition, showcase skill on a small level. And then the 20v20s and up are kind of culturally, people that do a big groups that have their own public servers that do PvE and PvP events, and they're kind of in a different place. They're already kind of set up. So I guess I was trying to ask into, are you, like, I'd given the example before of like, if I have a team that's got 30-40 people that consistently sign up to events or whatever, I might, this for season 2, I might sign up for a 20v20, and the next season I might sign up for a 10v10 just for shits and giggles. Do you kind of foresee any restriction on like, hey man, why are you signing up for the 10v10s? Like, that's not really what you're meant for. And I suppose there's kind of a built-in disincentive there in, yeah, I could sign up for the 10v10, but then that means that I can't sign up for the 20v20 or the 20v20 plus, and then that's less of my guys that can play in general.
No, yeah, no. I wouldn't, not allow them to do it. Usually, and we have had it happen where people have dropped a weight class this season, and it's usually because of participation. People have lost interest in the game, or they moved on with life. Things change personally for every team. And they usually give an example on why they want to drop it. I don't necessarily ask for one, and I probably wouldn't. So I would allow a team that has consistently played in 3 seasons at 20v20 to drop down to a 10v10. I don't have an issue with it.
Okay. And then I don't have a question specifically for it, so I'll just throw it in here. Speaking of culture between the brackets, just speaking to culture in general, what is your kind of expectation and your management, I guess, expectations as well? Say you've got a team that's really great. Maybe they've won 2 of the tournaments so far, but they're super fucking toxic and they're dicks, like in every conceivable manner. There's a bunch of teams that are like that in squad, because again, there's like, once you've gone so far with just caring about skill and curating for skill, those people don't, if you have that kind of metric or standard from a team perspective, probably don't give a fuck about people's personalities or like racism and stuff like that. I don't mean kind of like sort of woke standards for racism, like, you said a joke that I wasn't comfortable with. I mean like genuine fucking strangely racist people. Yeah, what kind of effect do you want to have on the culture from like a tournament hoster's perspective with working with those people? Or obviously the Discord has the rule of like, you guys aren't going to police people based off of conduct in other Discords, but like if my team is high on our own supply and we're talking shit like crazy in the fucking text chat while we're playing a match, what's sort of the expectation there?
So I think we do a good job. We nip that in pretty quick. I think our GMs hop in and say, quit typing in global. There comes situations where we might have to kick somebody and ban them from the server. We've done it, and we will continue to do it. I've stressed, especially with some of the hiccups we've had in season 1, and I try to let teams vent, because I understand it is a competitive league. No one likes to lose. I kind of let them vent a little bit, but when it starts getting personal or you start attacking other individuals, that's a hard stop for me, and we remove those people. This season I have zero tolerance for it. If you do want to vent in your own team channel, that way no other team sees it, and you can yell at me all day long. I don't care. But once it starts getting into a public chat or public lobby, we're going to start enforcing, bans, suspensions, so on and so forth. We don't want this to be a place where, even people that may say something racist outside of this Discord, we've gotten tickets where people submit that kind of thing, and we do end up banning people from that because we have a hard rule against that. So it's really situation dependent, but it's not like I'm sitting here looking at everyone's Discord and policing it, because one, I don't have the time for that, and it's really not my role. But if someone brings it to our attention, we take action on it.
Gaia. Good deal. Good deal. Already asked that. Is there anything that you guys, not to give away any crazy spoilers or anything silly, but are there any teasers that you guys would like to kind of give for season 2 to get people hyped up?
I mean, honestly, I think we've been pretty open so far with season 2. Unfortunately, I've kind of had to step away. I'm tearing down my house and building a new one. That kind of happened very quickly. So I've had to kind of step away, hyper, and we've added a bunch of new staff members that are really stepping up. And I've seen them active in the reps chat, asking questions, getting feedback. I hope everyone's excited. I like to see people go out there and have fun. We started this thing and my intention was on playing. Unfortunately, it is revolved around, managing versus playing, which I'm okay with because I see everyone else really enjoying it and having a good time. And I hope they continue to do so. And I'm excited to see, how long we can sustain and keep this thing going. I want everyone to have a fun shot and, make a somewhat stressful game, in public lobbies, a little more fun with a little competitive, friendly play.
Nice. Good to hear. I had a bunch of other questions, but they all kind of got answered through the course of actually just talking about different subjects and going into depth with stuff. So that's nice. That's kind of all I had.
Read your mind.
Yeah. Well, everything kind of just has natural like offflows and transitions if you're already talking about stuff like culture. That's kind of all I had for you guys. Kind of touched on everything that I thought was going to be interesting and that I was curious about. Thank you for again kind of sitting down with me and
hey, no problem at all.
From like a pitcher's perspective or from a staff perspective, because this for sure didn't exist in squad. Someone that was actually trying to do interviews with teams and get people to kind of talk to themselves, and that's kind of the primary reason why I wanted to do it, because I think that led to a considerable like degrading of the culture, or even just a lack of one completely. And especially from like if you're like an average Joe on a team, not that this is anyone's here specifically's job to fix from a culture perspective, but for most people on probably not a team that they're going to end up staying on 2 months from now, if that guy never has an opportunity to see what the process looks like, or to see why a balancing decision was made, or why that's important as a rule, or what's coming forward. And it's oftentimes being able to kind of see behind the veil. Usually it's through someone cool in like an upper leadership position, just being honest. That it keeps people playing and keeps people in the scene and keeps people interested in like season 3.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the guy that talks to all the reps, talks to the people. I think anyone that's talked to me knows that I'm a pretty down to earth guy. I got no problem hopping into VC and having a good conversation. And I encourage people that if they got questions and they want to have a conversation, by all means, I apologize. I may not get back to you right away, but you know, I will sit down and have a good conversation with you. I've got no problem with it.
All right. Well, good deal. Do you guys have anything to say in parting, or?
No, I don't think so. Just
Hyper,
hopefully
the
the
silent
USA
man.
wins the World Cup, right? For all the EU players out there.
Man,
Hyper
I
might
just
be
hope
napping.
all our effort is fucking fun to watch and fun to play.
You know, in this and what we do, there's always going to be, you know, we did something wrong, and I'm going to tell you what, we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. That's part of life. It's going to happen, but the only thing we can do is work on improving, and you know, continue to make it better.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks for sitting down, guys.
Yeah, no problem, Amy. Good talking with you.